This is the American Indians, Indigenous Peoples' Truce. Justice for all, the most dangerous show on media anywhere. OCO and greetings. I'm Winter Nightwolf, and this is the American Indian Indigenous Peoples' Truce. Justice for all, the most dangerous show on media anywhere. I have a special guest. I'm looking at her. Her name is Leslie Fry, and Leslie is my executive producer, and she's sitting in for this particular conversation tonight as my co-host. How you doing, Leslie?
Doing well. Hello, everyone.
We have a very special guest tonight, and he's very special to me because I've known him for a while. His name is Dr. Larry Fisher, but his native name is Wampanoag Wampatuck. He is the chief Sachem of the Massachusetts Indians of Massachusetts. And can we bring him in? Hey, how you doing, nephew?
Hey, Aquini.
So we're going to have a conversation tonight about some very interesting things that have happened on your horizon and throughout your life. But first, I've only said a few things about you. Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you grew up, and how you got to be where you are today.
Sure. So let me just greet you first in my language. Aquini wunikisak nutasmis wampamiquin nitomas marakiset nitomas Massachusetts Kudabarimash nitampoags. My name is Larry Fisher. My traditional name is Wampamiquin, and I bear the name of my ancestor Wampatuck. And I come from the tribe called Matakiset. And our nation is called Massachusetts Nation, or Massachusetts in our language. And it bears the name of our nation. The Commonwealth state of Massachusetts today bears its name from our nation. Our tribe is located in southeastern Massachusetts, and we are from the Tinicate Indian Reservation.
Okay. So where did you grow up?
So I grew up in a city called Boston, Massachusetts, what most people know as the first contact of the Mayflower family. When they arrived to the eastern shores, they came into what was known as Massachusetts. And I grew up in a city within that city called Dorchester. And the time that I grew up there was quite rough. Wasn't an easy time to be a young man of color in that community. But somehow I made it out, and I'm very thankful for that. But I grew up in Dorchester, very rough neighborhood.
Okay, so I understand that you are an author. To my surprise, I found out a year ago. And that you completed your first book.
I have.
And second book, okay. So what is the title of this book?
The title of my second book is called Tribal Plasticity. It's an exploration into the realities between unrecognized and recognized tribes in the United States.
And that's been an issue for a long time, and it continues to be an issue even today. I have a very serious problem with this whole idea of state and federal recognition. We were already here. So why do we need some foreigners to come here and do all the bad things they did to our people and then want to sit in a chair of authority and say, well, you're a federally recognized tribe. You're not good enough to be federal, so we're going to designate you as a state recognized tribe. Where in the hell did all that come from?
So recognition is quite a complex area of government to government relationships. It started at the federal level with Benjamin Franklin, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And it went on and evolved into the Committee on Indian Affairs, to the Commission on Indian Affairs, and to the Office of Indian Affairs, and now to the Bureau of Indian Affairs that's housed under the Department of Interior. Recognition is quite complex. It's an honorable action that's done almost today in a very strategic and insidious way to give reparation to tribal communities in a way of saying, yes, we acknowledge that we've done something wrong here, and we're trying our best to make it right. Recognition is very complex, especially here in the Northeast region of Indian country. Unfortunately, the criteria that a tribe must meet, such as mine, to petition for federal acknowledgement, it's very culturally insensitive, the way that the petitioning criteria for us tribes to have to meet it. It was developed in a way that was kind of left out for East Coast tribes to even really be able to petition in a way that was culturally competent or sensitive to what our needs are.
Okay, so now we're at a point of the white man came to America, invaded our country. They stepped into our pristine waters and put their feet on our bountiful homelands. And now they want to act as if they're doing our people a favor by recognizing us. I don't remember ever sending for them. Anybody in my family ever sending for them. And I know this is kind of crazy, but I'm crazy anyway. So why didn't they present a green card to get here?
Well, again, I think the power of militarized action was at play when we talk about what took place when the military that came off, some of the military men who came off the Mayflower, such as Mr. Miles Standish, the military captain who essentially killed many leaders, many of our sachems of our Massachusetts nation. And that was to make progress forward for his folks who are wild card settlers and Puritans who are escaping religious persecution from England and the Netherlands. But I think that has trickled over, and it's been maintained through what they now call the Bureau of Indian Affairs, that has been developed in a way to one, support tribal governments in such a way, but also in a way to control or contain the actual inherent sovereignty of those tribal nations, or their international legal personality to exercise jurisdiction in such a way.
I'm sorry, I'm just going to throw this in there, Larry and Leslie. BIA, Bureau of Indian Affairs, tribes that I know refer to BIA as bossing Indians around or the Bureau of Indian Annihilation.
Mm.
And it appears as though everything that they've done has been to limit who we are, our authority, and our own self-governance. Go ahead, Leslie. Didn't mean to cut you off.
No, no. I was just going to say, to me, recognition and reparations is a double-edged sword. Why would anybody want it? You know, based on the fact that what you say, the BIA is to boss Indians around, and then you have to be recognized here in the United States when you've already been here. Why would anybody want to be federally recognized?
So that's a great question, Leslie. One of the things that I try to point out in my book, Tribal Plasticity, is that there has been some amazing works that has been supportive from the BIA to tribal governments. The fact that some tribal governments do exercise a portion of inherent sovereignty, whereas they're capable of sustaining themselves economically, politically, and socially. Some tribes have done okay with the support in hand of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And I make that very clear in my book. But also some tribes have been at the threat of the Bureau of Indian Affairs by way of losing their land that they've had, in their possession from time immemorial.
Right.
Some tribes have been strategically X'd out of the 106 Section 106 consultation process, whereas, federal agencies do recognize that they must begin meaningful consultation with tribal governments, but unfortunately, sometimes those tribal governments are not being met with in the consultation process to the end of the phase of the project being almost to near completion, and that can cause major harm to these tribal nations. So it is like a double-edged sword. We have some support from the federal government when we get recognized. It allows us to do things like have access to certain resources, allocated resources, funding, and also to actually be out loud and proud, without hesitation or reservation, to say, yes, look, we are a tribal nation, and this is how we operate under our own rights of inherent sovereignty. But then, without the recognition, the reality is, do those tribes still retain their own sovereignty? And does contractual agreements pose a threat on a tribe's inherent sovereignty and self-determination? So I think those two things are two mechanisms that we must critically think about when tribes do petition for federal recognition. And so I guess my hopes are, with Deb Haaland now being the new Secretary of Interior and having a personal background, not just a professional background, but a personal background in tribal affairs and government relationship and nation building, that maybe some change is coming for tribal nations.
Okay, so what audience are you gearing your book towards? I'm from what I could see, I think every tribe in the Western Hemisphere need to read this book.
Sure. So our tribe is an interesting tribe. We're not state recognized or federally acknowledged, but we're a tribal nation. We have been since time immemorial. No matter how, the state or these organizations or agencies or historical societies had, whether they hid documentation or not, as long as the blood was continuously pumping through the people and that we continued to breathe and we continued to cry Matakeesit, we always remained the people of Matakeesit. And so my book is geared toward people who are, one, from federally recognized communities, to get them an opportunity to critically think through the developmental phases and the evolution of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and also for tribes who are unrecognized, who don't have state recognition and don't have federal recognition. And it says, look, my tribe was just like yours, and we still are just like yours. But we understand that we still have the inherent powers and sovereignty to adjudicate the way that we as we feel to and as we wish to, and that there's nothing wrong with that, and no one can stop you from doing so. And it's about being honest, and it's about being true to yourself, and true to the families is what we really talk about. We look at everything from a tribal nation perspective, and we often forget to look at things from just a family perspective. And really, tribal community really is just that simple. It's just family, So, we have every right to continue to be family, and to do that. So, yeah, the book targets folks who are non-recognized and recognized.
Everywhere that I've been in Indian country, and I've traveled throughout Indian country extensively, when I met people there that were members of tribes or communities, they didn't ask me whether I was state or federally recognized. They asked me, who's your family?
That's right.
And that's how we determine who we are, is through our family history and structures. So, I'm really proud of you.
Thank you,
Larry. But I mean, I got a lot of reasons to be proud of you.
Thank you.
For those that don't know, Larry was a United Nations ambassador for civil rights and human rights, and he's traveled throughout the world. I know you don't want me to tell it, but I'm gonna tell it anyway.
That's okay.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about your experience with the United Nations, with doing what you did. And you did a lot. You don't like to talk about it, but you did a lot. People tell me.
Yeah, so my background in the United Nations really came from the plight of the Matakisa tribe, and not having recognition and not being treated as a nation as we are. And so I went beyond the state because there was political distractions, and also political challenges for the Matakisa tribe within our own local state. And even at the federal level, because of the criteria, which is very challenging to meet, it stops us, and it kind of creates us, it makes us to become stagnated in our efforts of revitalization. But the United Nations did something very different. They created this mechanism called the UPR, which was called the Universal Periodic Review. And I found that the Universal Periodic Review was a way for us to talk a little bit about our plight as a tribal nation, give a little bit of the historical background, and also talk about what the challenges have been over the many years, and then what's going on with the tribe now, and then where does the tribe want to be at. So I thought that mechanism was the most healthiest and strategic and most culturally sensitive framework that was ever developed around caring and nurturing for tribal nations such as mine. And that led me to working and being invited from many folks at the United Nations. And once I got into the United Nations, I'll tell you, people always ask me, they say, how were you able to be this diplomat that you were? And honestly, Jay, I say, you know what? I learned from growing up in the streets of Dorchester, in the city of Boston. I took what I understood around survival, being there and having to survive, and I applied it right there in the United Nations, and the UN became my playground for a few years. And I went on, I met with tons of ambassadors, and really I got so comfortable with the mechanisms and how to move about inside the United Nations that other indigenous nations at the UN's PFII, which is the Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, they saw that about me, and they asked me to support their issues and causes, and so I did. So each year I would represent these tribes. I'd fly out, learn more about their tribal governments, work with international attorneys, work with different ambassadors, help the different diplomats from other countries to develop a mechanism for oversight on the implementation process for the new Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples that was adopted by the UN's General Assembly in 2007. And that was something that I was very passionate about, and I still am. One of the things that I saw as a challenge at the United Nations level was that the UN creates a lot of great mechanisms, but doesn't have a lot of power behind it where we can make great change. And really what stopped me from moving forward was two things. Trump came into office, And it became difficult because he was not supportive to the work that the Obama administration was on the oversight of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And then secondly, I started to see a lot of tribal leaders at the United Nations die and lose their lives because they spoke out about their country, which actually signed on to those declarations. And so the next years, I would see their wives or I'd see their families still show up to the UN, and I would say, what happened to so-and-so? Why is he not here? And they would say they killed him. So that became very devastating for me, and it became overwhelming. And when I really wanted to do work, the United Nations just absolutely did not provide the proper recourse to be able to deal with those kind of issues. And so I began to focus more of my attention back onto my own tribal government at the local level and at the federal level.
And your children, because you got young children.
Absolutely.
Right, because they need their dad, you know. I see. I hear you. I hear you.
Help me understand something. So you said that when they were fighting for tribal rights, they were killed. Are you saying that they were murdered?
They were.
So in my opinion, and this is just my perspective, if you're going to be killed for speaking out about tribal rights and reparations, then why be kept by a nation that silences you when you're speaking out? This is like this to me. I'd rather not be, sanctioned by the U.S. government. If meaning sanctioning that and me fighting for the rights of people means that I'm chattel in a sense.
Right.
Now that I've become recognized as a nation, I can no longer be and live free as a native without being put under some kind of restriction placed on me by the government, or speaking out would cause me to die.
Yeah, Leslie, one of the most vicious areas in countries that I've seen this happen to was with the West Papua New Guinea people. And they were fighting with their military in Indonesia. And the Indonesian military were actively and aggressively going after the indigenous leaders who would speak out of their country to the United Nations. It was happening a lot. Also in Brazil as well. It was happening as well.
Yes.
Some of the tribal leaders from Brazil would come to the United Nations. They'd speak out. Next year, we'd hear that they were burnt in a fire. The forest was burnt up in the fire as well.
The current president of Brazil is completely against native culture there. He wants them annihilated. He wants them wiped out. All for the simple statement or reason that he believes is that they're lazy and that they don't add to the population of Brazil.
Right.
You've got leaders speaking out against, natives who are aboriginal to that area, and you want to wipe them out. And it's easier for him to say that because that means that they can go ahead and encroach on these people's lands, tear down the rainforest, force them into society that they don't have any, they don't know how or to survive within that type of society. So by pushing them out, encroaching on their land, he feels better by stating that they don't add to the population. It's best to get rid of them.
Yeah, it's happening all over the world, and the interesting part was with the United States as well. At the UN level, the United States, they're very well put together with their paperwork. They're very well put together with being able to show that there are 574 federally acknowledged tribal governments. But what they don't talk too much about at the United Nations when they take the floor is that all of the other tribal nations, which are the unrecognized communities, the invisible nations, and the invisible people, it's not always about just nations. The community and the people and the population in which we talk a lot about in this book are actually the people that you see on a daily basis walking through this country. Some are mislabeled as people of color. Some are mislabeled as Black American people or Latin American people. They're just simply indigenous people. who've had their lands taken. They've had their identities misclassified against them, and those people still have simple rights, as Indian people. And the United States, they don't talk much about that. But again, when Obama was in office, he did put out a letter in 2010 on how the U.S. would support the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. But there's a lot of work to be done in that area.
But you know what? I'm going to tell you this too. Obama did more for Native American people in his short stint of 8 years as the president of the United States than all of his predecessors combined. Obama had a yearly tribal summit when he brought tribal communities and leadership to the White House. I was there. But since then and before then, nothing happened. So you really don't want to know what I think. Not on this.
Please tell us.
These fools were chased out of Europe by the crowned heads of Europe. They had nowhere to go. So what did they do? They came across the Atlantic Ocean. And they found a land so beautiful and so free that they met us. And immediately, Larry, you know our people, Leslie, we're very kind people. We took them in. We helped them survive the very first winter. Mm-hmm. They landed in Massachusetts Bay. They didn't land on Plymouth Rock. They shipwrecked on that rock. And it was cold, it was snowing, and the people in that area got into their dugouts and went out there and rescued their butts and brought them back, gave them shelter, fed them, and taught them how to survive the winter. And then showed them how to plant crops. 1 year later, they were feeling so up on themselves that they went up in Connecticut and they murdered all of these native people up there, left their families out in the field because they want to celebrate their success.
Right. And that's where the national holiday Thanksgiving came from.
Yeah, so
it was over the massacre of the Pequot Indians.
Exactly. What kind of people do this? The same kind of people that hang black people. They've been doing it ever since they've been here. The same kind of people that continue to crucify and hang black people. George Floyd, for an example. I think it's time that they get served their just due. Maybe I'm just a little too crazy. I'm not crazy. But, how much more can the people of the Western Hemisphere take from these invaders? Because that's what the hell they were. They were invaders. They weren't welcome guests. Nobody asked them to come to the party. As a matter of fact, how the hell did they find out about the party? You asked me, Leslie, to tell you how I feel.
Well, I know that's how you feel. I think, and you said something too, Sachem, there. You said that there are a lot of us walking around who are indigenous that have no nation, have no identity. And it's better for us to identify with the big four, and I call that the big four being Black, Hispanic, white, or Asian, instead of saying that we are native and that we have native roots. This has always been designed this way. This is an issue of people of melanation, the white race against the melanated race, and most importantly, the indigenous and the first people that have been here, because these are conquering people and they're colonizing people, and they've shaped and changed what we are today. Sadly, that's what we've become. So my comment to you is, how do you use this book? I know that you're using this book to help people who are recognized and unrecognized come to come to a knowledge of themselves, knowing that they should be a part, but because by being united as family, we can do much more if we are connected instead of disconnected. So in this book, and you're talking about revitalization, what are some of the challenges that you've had in revitalizing your nations, these people, other nations?
Sure. It's such a deep question. The challenges. So again, my tribe really faced the real brunt of colonization, the first contact. The state's named after us, the Massachusetts Nation. We had about maybe 188 different tribes within that state. Today you have only 2 federally acknowledged, and you have about, I don't know, maybe 12, 13 tribes that are unacknowledged. The efforts were real interesting. We're Native people. We have genealogy. Massachusetts has a role, an Indian role, just like most states do. Cherokee folks have a Dawes role. You know, you have the Briggs Report. We have something called the John Milton Earl Report, and it's from 1859. And each tribe is listed in that report. John Milton, he was a senator of Massachusetts, and his job was to report on the condition of the Indians in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts after the King Philip's War era. And with that documentation, it made it quite simple for tribes like mine to revitalize ourselves. We simply do our genealogy. You find the person who's listed as a native or listed as a Sachem or descends from one of the Sachems. And then you tie those surnames to the surnames that are listed on that 1859 Earl Report. And it shows you exactly which tribal community you're from. In Massachusetts, we have something called I call it the Massachusetts Dilemma. Because the Commissioner on Indian Affairs does not have a petitioning criteria that tribal communities can meet or must meet in order to become state recognized. Currently, the system is grandfathered into the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So if the commissioner, who's a tribal member of the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe, which was one of the federally recognized tribes, if he likes you and likes what you all are doing, and he doesn't see that your tribe poses any threat to his own tribe or to the Commonwealth state of Massachusetts and their economic development, then he'll recognize you. But if you're a tribe like mine, per se, that has land and has deeds that have been held in perpetuity since time immemorial, he may not want to recognize you. It may be a threat. It may be a conflict of interest, unfortunately. So in Massachusetts, the revitalization efforts were very challenging for me to get recognition, but we blazed right on through it. My background is that I grew up in 28 foster homes, Leslie, from the age of 3 to 12. And that all that did was build character in me. And it also built what we call resiliency. And so when they threw everything they could at me, I never gave up. I kept trucking, I kept moving, because I knew that the ancestors were behind this, and I knew that Creator this was divinely appointed for me to do the work for the people. And I'll tell you, Leslie, I started off with just me, myself, and I. My great aunts were the ones who pushed me and said, "Nephew, you have to do this. You have to do this." Our people were drowned over at the ponds that we lived on. We have this land here. We have this land. And through a spiritual divination, when I came back from the Shinnecock tribe, an ancestor had come to me and he told me in my language where the land was and what the land was called. And so I called my great grandmother before she passed, and she says, "No, baby, I don't know. You know, I'm not sure. It sounds familiar, but I don't know." So then I started to do some research, and there it was. It popped right up. But little did I know, one of the powwows, one of the medicine men, Robert Green, he had brought me to my land about 2 or 3 years before I ever knew what that land was called. And I couldn't, for the love of me, I just couldn't understand, why did this old man bring me out here in the middle of winter, which Massachusetts winters are cold, and have me stand in the middle of this land? And he kept saying to me, dimwit, dimwit, you're not paying attention, are you, dimwit? You know, and I was like getting pissed with him. Like, how's this guy calling me a dimwit? Number one, I'm being respectful to him. But anyways, years later, come to find out that land was the land that my 5th great grandfather had fought very hard to reserve from my 11th great grandfather, who actually reserved that land in 1664 as a perpetuity restrictive perpetual covenant deed, which was one of the first ever deeds that was done by an American Indian in this country. And it was considered an Aboriginal title. And that's still U.S. law. Aboriginal title is still considered U.S. law. And the only folks that can abrogate an Aboriginal title is Congress. And because Congress has never abrogated this title of land, I fought very hard to preserve this reservation. And I also fought hard to re-educate my family and my community on who they were, what were the stories, where our burial sites were at, you know, what our customs and traditions were. And we had a lot of stuff that was written down. And I fought hard with the archives, the historical societies. I was kicked out. I was banned from going to different places. I was basically laughed out of Indian country. I could no longer go to powwows, which everybody loved me as an Indian man before I became the Sachem. You know, and a lot of people still, you know, make great fun, you know, to say, oh, you're a self-appointed Sachem. But let me tell you something, Leslie. I was able to save a beautiful people, and I was able to bring back culture and bring back hope into lives of community people who had lost hope, who had lost their identity, had lost their culture. And today we have a very, very productive tribal community. We're thriving, excellent. And we also have a beautiful federal relationship with the many different federal agencies in consultative status through the 106 process. And we're not state recognized and we're not federally recognized, but we stand on our truth and we stand on our honesty and we stand on integrity as a Matakeesit people. And that's all we've ever needed.
Okay. You know, I am so excited, Larry, to be able to talk to you like this and present this to everybody, well, the world. But I got one question for you.
Sure.
What are some of the goals for the Massachusetts tribe moving forward?
Sure. So our major goal is that we continue to educate these children that you see right here in this photo that keeps popping up.
Mm-hmm.
They're our cultural moderators. And it's funny that you asked me that, Jay, because we were at our heron ceremony a couple weeks ago, right on our reservation there. That in that picture, we're on the Cotiticate River. Mm-hmm. And that's right on the edge of where some of our burial grounds are and where we have our ceremonies right up above there on the top of the water's edge. And at our ceremony, one of the young people said, but we don't really know all of our culture. I said, yes, it was lost. I said, but as long as you all are breathing and as long as you all can speak, as long as you all can cry, I said, you today are the cultural moderators of this nation, of Matakeesit. Because Matakeesit runs through your veins and through your blood, what you do today is what our young people and our future generations are going to do for the next 7 generations coming after you. So you all are the cultural moderators. And so when you ask me what are the goals of this nation, the goal is to continue to educate these beautiful children and to teach them, they're learning their language. They're singing songs in unison together today. They're making traditional artwork. They're understanding the landscape of their lands. They're reading through the historical documents. They're reading through the deeds. And they're building the resiliency that they already naturally had within them to fight to keep that land within the tribe. And so our goal is to continue to educate our young people so that this history is not forgotten ever again.
Leslie, do you have anything else to say to him before we close out the show and I give my closing words?
You know, that picture is one of my favorite pictures, and this is one of the reasons why I was showing it so much. Is I love that picture. It speaks volumes to me, and even now you told me what that was about. Now I know why it speaks to me. You are an inspiration. You're an inspiration to a lot of us out there who are trying to reconnect, a lot of us who are trying to find their people that have been lost to them. Um, I encourage you to continue to do that. I will be watching you. I will be checking in with you and talking to you about things because I feel that not only are you doing this for your own people, but you're doing it for other people like me who are trying to find my people. It's important that we continue that because a lot of us have been told to forget that. Forget it, it does not exist.
That's right.
But you can't deny what is inside of you. That blood is inside of you, and your ancestors are speaking to you to always remember. And because we remember, we will be, we will never be forgotten, and we will be a strong nation of people again. It's been spoken about. I know, Elder, you were talking about the fact that this is the year that people are going to be reconnecting, and this is the year that natives are going to have a bigger voice. And we are already seeing this happening right now. So I encourage people out there watching this show to make sure that you be that voice, make sure that you uphold those traditions and continue to give that to your children and recognize that. So thank you so much, Sachem, for that.
And I want to encourage everyone that's watching this broadcast. If you like what we do, please go on YouTube, like my show. I want you to also subscribe to this show and leave a comment. Because the more of you that look at this and do this, the better off all of us are going to be. And to you, Larry, go ahead.
I just want to say one more thing. If you do like the show too, make sure that you click the bell on YouTube so that when we do air, that you'll be notified that we're coming on air.
Okay.
And you can find information about our tribe as well. If you go to www.matakisit.com, you can follow us there. We have a news article that we update quite often, and it'll keep you up to date on what we're doing. And for those who are trying to revitalize those tribal governmental efforts, reach out to us. We're more than happy to help. Don't be discouraged by the rest of the negative world. Indian country needs to see a healthy Indian country, and that means we must share and we must lead and we must support one another.
Larry, I have this to say to you. I am so proud of you.
Me too.
And I'm proud that you're my nephew. And I'm proud that you care so much about other people.
Thank you.
And that's what a lot of these so-called Native leaders need to do. They need to stop caring about their own personal egos and start caring about their people. Because it's all about the people.
That's right.
I will say to all of you, thank you so much for tuning in tonight. And in the words of the Cherokee people, my people, Danada, Goai, Wado.